A child rejected for his deformity returns 20 years later for revenge on his family. Life isn't always easy, but resilience is what helps us get through it. In this video, we're diving into the incredible stories of people who've conquered adversity by tapping into their inner strength. Whether you're facing personal struggles or simply looking for motivation, this video will inspire you to rise above and push forward. If you find value in this, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Stories TH for more content that will keep you going no matter what life throws at you. Parents reject when having a deformity. 20 years later, he returns to take revenge on everyone. Hello. Everyone enjoy these relaxing moments while you watch under the gloomy gray sky of Shadow Valley, where narrow streets were covered in dust and red brick houses crowded together. A child was born into the cold rejection of his own family. The boy Samuel Graham let out his first cry in an old house on the edge of town, but instead of joy, the only welcome he received was his father's displeased scowl. And ugly child Edward spat out each word bitterly as he looked at his newborn son. Samuel's face had rough features, slightly large ears, thick eyebrows, and round eyes that seemed out of place in the Graham family. Edward couldn't hide his disgust. He didn't believe this child was his Rose. What kind of monstrosity have you given birth to? Edward growled, glaring at his wife. With suspicion, Rose, cradling Samuel in her arms, had tears streaming down her face. She didn't have the courage to fight back, only looking at her husband with pleading eyes. But Edward didn't care. He turned on his heels and walked out of the room, leaving Rose alone with the newborn. She gently kissed Samuel's forehead and whispered tearfully, "I'm sorry, my son. I can't protect you." Samuel's early years. Samuel grew up under the rejection of his own father. From the moment he was born, he had never received any love from Edward. His father never held him, never called him by name, and even refused to acknowledge him as his son. He always kept his distance, as if Samuel were some kind of disease to be avoided. Rose loved her son, but she was too weak to stand up to Edward. She could only hold Samuel in her arms in secret when Edward was not home, whispering small words of comfort. But that was not enough to protect Samuel from the cruelty of the outside world. Gradually, the story of the straying-looking child spread throughout the town. People began to whisper about the Graham boy, their gossip filled with malice. "He looks like a monkey. He must be a bad omen. Look at him. No one in this town looks like that. It's best to stay away from him." These cruel words soon turned into a name that everyone used to refer to him, Monkey Boy. At first, Samuel didn't understand its meaning, but over time, through the disdainful glances and mocking laughter of adults, he realized he was different from other children. As he grew older, Samuel wanted to go outside and play with the other kids in town, but every time he approached a group of children, they would back away, some even screaming, "Mom, the monkey is coming." The parents in town didn't bother to hide their discomfort either. When they saw Samuel, they pulled their children closer and whispered in their ears, "Don't play with him, dear. He's a monster." Those words cut into Samuel's heart like knives. Why was he treated this way? What had he done wrong? He was just a child like everyone else, but no one wanted to be near him. One time, Samuel tried to approach a group of children playing soccer in the town square. He smiled shyly and hesitantly asked, "Can I play too?" The answer was a burst of laughter. One boy in the group, Peter, smirked. "Play a monkey like he knows how to play soccer." Another child picked up the ball and pretended to roll it towards Samuel as if offering it kindly. But just as Samuel bent down to pick it up, the boy suddenly kicked it hard into his face. Samuel fell to the ground, blood dripping from his nose. The whole group roared with laughter. The following days were no better. Wherever he went, he heard whispers and saw contemptuous looks. The adults kept their distance, and the children mocked and bullied him. Samuel felt like he didn't belong in this town. Whenever he returned home, he hoped for comfort from his mother, but Rose could only silently wipe away his tears. Edward, on the other hand, openly showed his hatred. One day, after hearing the neighbors talk about how Samuel was being called Monkey Boy, Edward turned to Rose, his voice full of anger. "This is all your fault. If you hadn't given birth to him, I wouldn't have to endure this humiliation." Samuel stood there, his tiny fists clenched, tears streaming down his face. He didn't understand why his father despised him so much, but the worst part was that he couldn't do anything to change it. Some nights he lay awake staring at the ceiling, Wondering, am I really a monster? He had tried his best to be good, but no matter what he did, people still looked at him with disgust. There was only one person in town who didn't treat him badly, Mrs. Helen, an old woman who lived near the market. She was the only one who sometimes smiled at him when they crossed paths one afternoon, while Samuel sat curled up in a corner of the market, trying to avoid people's eyes. Mrs. Helen approached and placed a piece of bread in front of him. "Are you hungry?" Samuel looked at her surprised. He had never received kindness from anyone in town before. He nodded and took the bread. "Still way?" Mrs. Helen sighed and looked at him with warmth in her eyes. "Don't let their cruel words define who you are, little one." Those words moved Samuel, but just then a group of women from the village walked by, and upon witnessing the scene, sneered. "Mrs. Helen is pitying that monster again. It should never have been born." Samuel lowered his head, gripping the piece of bread tightly in his hands. Mrs. Helen only sighed and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. But Samuel knew that one kind person couldn't change an entire town. The tempt to stares, the cruel words, and the rejection from his own father had pushed him into a deep darkness, and this was only the beginning of a nightmare. The sun cast long shadows over the narrow street leading to Shadow Valley School. Samuel walked with his head down, his small hands clutching the straps of his backpack, hoping to make it to class without being noticed, but such wishes had never come true for him. Here he was, always an outsider. And worse yet, he had caught the attention of Matthew Nelson. Matthew was the son of one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in Shadow Valley. His father, Philip Nelson, owned most of the land in town, and his mother came from a prestigious lineage. To the teachers, Matthew was a boy with a bright future, but to Samuel, he was a living nightmare. Matthew didn't just bully him because of his appearance. He did it because he enjoyed the feeling of controlling someone weaker, and there was no one weaker than Samuel. At first, Matthew's torment was just words: "Monkey boy, be careful, or you'll start climbing trees." The other children burst into laughter, while Samuel kept his head down, trying to walk faster. But the more he ignored it, the more amused Matthew became. One day, as Samuel was walking home, Matthew and his friends blocked his path at a deserted street corner. "Where are you going, little monkey?" Matthew smirked, hands in his pockets, standing in the way. Samuel took a step back, but behind him, two other boys had already closed off his escape. "I asked you a question." Not answering, Samuel remained silent, trying to slip past, but Matthew shoved him roughly, making him fall to the ground. His knees hit the pavement, sending a sharp pain through his legs. "Get up, monkey boy, or are you going to crawl on all fours like a real monkey?" Laughter erupted around him as Samuel clenched his fist, struggling to keep his tears from falling. But that only encouraged Matthew further. He bent down, picked up a small rock, and suddenly threw it straight at Samuel. Thud! Samuel clutched his arm where the stone had struck, but Matthew wasn't done. He picked up another rock and signaled to his friends, "Let's see if this monkey is fast on its feet." The stones rained down on Samuel. One hit his back, another struck his leg. He curled up, shielding his face, but he couldn't escape the cruel barrage. The next day, when Samuel arrived at school with bruises on his arms, he hoped that anyone would notice and ask what had happened, but no one did. Mr. Frank, the teacher, glanced at the marks on his skin, but frowned slightly before continuing his lesson. Samuel knew why. Matthew was the son of a Nelson family. No one in this town dared to offend them. Seeing that the teacher didn't care only emboldened the other children. Samuel couldn't have a recess without Matthew finding him. He couldn't walk home without being ambushed. He couldn't have a single peaceful day. One day, while Samuel was sitting in class, Matthew flashed a wicked grin and signal to his friends. During recess, they sneaked into Samuel's backpack and stuffed it full of bananas. When Samuel returned to his seat, Matthew stood up and dramatically gasped, "Oh no, what's in Monkey Boy's bag?" He yanked the bag from Samuel's grasp and flipped it open for the whole class to see. Banana tumbled onto the desk, and floor of the room erupted with laughter. "Moaning Monkey Boy needs bananas to survive. Go on, eat up, little monkey." Samuel stood frozen. He looked around the classroom. Some kids were laughing uncontrollably. Others whispered amongst themselves. No one told Matthew to stop. Matthew picked up a banana and held it up to Samuel's face. Mockingly, "Take it, stop pretending to be human." Sean boiled inside him. Enough was enough. In a burst of anger, Samuel slapped the bananas off the table and shouted, "Shut up, I'm not a monkey." But Matthew only grinned And then he punched him smack. Samuel staggered back, crashing on the floor. The taste of blood filled his mouth. No one intervened. The teacher wasn't there. The kids just stood and watched, laughing. Samuel pressed his hand to the ground, his whole body trembling. He wanted to get up, but Matthew crouched down, leaning close to his ear and whispering with cruel satisfaction, "You'll never be human. Samuel, you'll always be just a monkey." Laughter echoed through the room. Samuel clenched his teeth, but the tears had already begun to fall down his cheeks. No one stood up for him. No one save sod him. He was utterly alone. The relentless rain poured down onto the cobblestone streets of Shadow Valley, painting the sky in a dull gray today. Samuel just wanted to get home as quickly as possible to escape the prying eyes of the townspeople, but he couldn't. They appeared from around the corner, smirking wickedly the moment Samuel turned to run. Two of them had already blocked his path from behind. "Where are you going, monkey boy?" Matthew sneered, his voice blending with the pattering of the rain. Samuel shook his head, trying to slip past them, but they grabbed hold of him. "Let me go," he struggled, but one of the boys delivered a sharp punch to his stomach, making him collapse to his knees, gasping for breath. "You think you have the right to demand anything?" Matthew scoffed. "Today, we're going to show the whole town what you really are." Samuel was dragged across the wet streets toward the town square, the place where townspeople often gathered in the afternoon. The rain continued to fall, but there were still people standing under the eaves of shops and cafes, seeking shelter. No one said a word as they watched Matthew and his gang pull Samuel into the center of the square. They ripped off his jacket and threw it to the ground. "No, stop!" Samuel cried out, but his pleas only earned mocking laughter. One of the boys pulled out a rope they had brought along and tightly bound him to a tree in the middle of the square. "Scream for us, monkey boy!" Matthew ordered, his eyes gleaming with twisted delight. "No." Samuel shook his head, his voice breaking from fear and humiliation. Smack! Matthew struck him hard across the face. "I said scream." The pain burned, but worse than that were the eyes of the people around him. They just stood there. Some chuckled quietly, others pulled out their phones to record the scene. No one stepped in to stop Matthew. Samuel felt like nothing more than an animal, displayed in a circus for everyone's amusement. Matthew leaned in close, his whisper laced with cruelty, "If you don't scream like a monkey, I'll make you cry until you do." The shame, the despair, the sheer terror inside Samuel surged like a tidal wave, and then he screamed a broken, raw cry that mixed with the rain. But to Matthew and his friends, it was the sound of a trapped animal cornered with nowhere to run. Laughter erupted across the square. Some people raised their phones to capture the moment. Others simply shook their heads with amused smirks, but no one spoke up for him. The video went viral the next day. The video of Samuel tied to the tree, screaming like a monkey, spread throughout the town. One by one, every child at school watched it over and over again, whispering, mocking. Each viewing was like a knife stabbing deeper into Samuel's heart. He couldn't step outside without hearing snickers behind his back. He couldn't walk through the school hallways without feeling the mix of pity and ridicule in everyone's stares. Even the children who had never directly bullied him before began to whisper, "Monkey boy really is just a joke." How pathetic. Samuel ran all the way home, his body drenched from the rain. Mom. He burst into the house, searching desperately for Rose's eyes filled with tears and despair. Rose turned around, seeing her son trembling, his body covered in bruises from the beatings. "What happened, my dear?" Her voice was filled with panic. "Help me, Mom, please don't let them do this to me anymore." Samuel sobbed, gripping his mother's hands tightly, as if she were the only lifeline left in his world. But before she could respond, a cold, deep voice echoed from behind. "What the hell are you screaming like an animal for?" Samuel froze as he saw Edward Graham, his father, step out from the living room, a cigarette in hand, his expression filled with disgust. "You got humiliated. Serves you right." Edward sneered, "A freak like you never deserved love in the first place." Every word felt like a dagger plunging into Samuel's soul. "I'm not a monster," he screamed, tears streaming down his face. But Edward only looked at him as if he were trash. "You were born a disgrace. If I didn't kill you when you were little, the least you could do is learn to suffer in silence." Rose burst into tears, turning to her husband. "Don't say that he's your son." "My son?" Edward let out a bitter laugh, something like him. "Will never be my son." Samuel looked at his mother, hoping, praying that she would stand up for him. But she only sobbed, covering her face with her hands, too afraid to defy her husband. He took a step back, his heart shattered. No one would protect him. Samuel turned and ran out of the house, leaving behind his mother's muffled sobs and his father's cold, lifeless stare outside. The rain was still falling, but no amount of rain could wash away the shame Samuel had endured. Samuel left Shadow Valley on a stormy night. No one saw him off. He had nowhere to go, no one to turn. He just walked, following the road leading to the city. His thin jacket was soaked, clinging to his shivering body. His old, worn-out shoes barely held together. His stomach ached with hunger. But he didn't stop. He couldn't go back. He would rather die than return to that place. After 2 days of wandering, he finally arrived in New Haven, a city of towering buildings, crowded streets, and light that never went out. But for a child with no money, no home, and no one to rely on, this wasn't paradise. It was another kind of hell. No one paid attention to a skinny, filthy child curled up on the sidewalk. He begged for food, but most people only gave him looks of disdain. "Get lost, kid. I don't have money for you," a man snapped, shoving him aside, making him stumble into the street. An old woman selling food on the corner threw him a stale piece of bread, not even sparing him a glance. Samuel picked it up and devoured it like a starving animal at night. He curled up under an awning, trying to sleep despite the freezing cold, but his sleep was always restless, disturbed by the blaring of car horns, the hurried footsteps of strangers, and the constant fear of being woken up by thugs who wandered the streets like he did some days. He had nothing to eat some days. He barely had the strength to stand, but he refused to collapse. Samuel didn't want to die. He couldn't die. He had to survive. One afternoon, as Samuel wandered through a narrow alley, the smell of food drifted toward him from a small, run-down restaurant. Standing outside, his stomach growled loudly as he stared at the steaming plates of food being served to customers inside. The owner, a middle-aged man named Mr. Ramsey, noticed him. "Hey, kid, what are you doing there?" he asked, his voice neither harsh nor sympathetic. Samuel took a step back, ready to leave, but hunger made him desperate. "Can I work here?" he croaked, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Mr. Ramsey studied him for a long moment before unexpectedly tossing him a dirty rag. "Wash all the dishes in the back. If you do a good job, I'll feed you." Samuel grabbed the rag without hesitation and rushed into the kitchen, not uttering a single complaint from that day on. Samuel became the dishwasher at Mr. Ramsey's small restaurant. The work was far from easy. The dishwater was ice cold, leaving his hands red, and cracked grease clung to his skin. The smell of food embedded itself in his clothes, but he didn't care. At least he had food to eat every night. After closing, Mr. Ramsey always handed him a hot plate of rice. Samuel ate hungrily, feeling warmth spread through his body. The restaurant owner wasn't a talkative man, but sometimes he looked at Samuel with something different from the scorn he had always known. For the first time in his life, Samuel felt like he wasn't just some animal to be shunned. Samuel earned very little money, just enough to eat, but he never spent recklessly. He saved every penny every time he got paid. He carefully wrapped the money and hid it in a small box under his bed. He had a plan. He couldn't be a dishwasher forever. He had to learn every night after the restaurant closed. Samuel took advantage of the dim kitchen lights to read old newspapers left behind by customers. He practiced writing letters, recalling what little he had learned from his school days. Every morning, he walked past a secondhand bookstore, staring at the books through the glass, promising himself that one day he would be able to read them all. He didn't need anyone's help. He would change his fate on his own. But there was one thing no one knew. Even though his life had changed, Samuel never forgot what had happened to him. He never forgot the humiliation he endured in Shadow Valley, never forgot the contempt in his father's eyes, never forgot Matthew Nelson and his friends laughing as they tied him to a tree in the town square. And every time he remembered, a fire of rage burned inside him. One day he would return, and he would no longer be the weak boy that everyone trampled on. Rising from the bottom, Samuel never forgot the scornful looks, the brutal beatings, or the times he was humiliated in front of the entire town. But he also understood one thing: hatred alone wouldn't change his fate. He needed strength, not with his fists, but with his mind. After leaving Shadow Valley, Samuel threw himself into the harsh reality of city life with nothing but empty hands. He took on any job he could find to earn money: washing dishes at the restaurant, carrying heavy loads at the marketplace, sweeping floors in Grocery stores, even when he was treated poorly, he endured it all because he knew if he could hold on, he would find a way. One day, while working at the restaurant, Samuel overheard a group of customers talking about software programming. They spoke about strange lines of code, about people making thousands of dollars with just a computer. He didn't understand everything, but he knew one thing: this was an opportunity. He started looking for every way possible to learn about technology. By day, he worked. By night, he borrowed books, read old manuals, and sought guidance from anyone who knew more than him. He discovered that he had an incredible ability to absorb knowledge without money. For a computer, Samuel sneaked into the public library to use their free machines. Every day, he spent hours experimenting, learning how to write his first lines of code. Gradually, he started taking on small freelance jobs, online modifying websites, writing simple scripts, fixing software bugs. Not only did he earn his first real money from technology, but for the first time in his life, he felt valuable. A few years later, Samuel was skilled enough to start his own business. He invested every cent of his savings to launch a small software company. His company had nothing but an old computer and an unbreakable determination, but little by little, Samuel turned it into a real enterprise. The first clients came, then they recommended others. Within just a few years, Samuel had made a name for himself in the tech industry. The very people who once called him Monkey Boy now unknowingly used a product he created. But Samuel hadn't forgotten the town that once destroyed him. He knew that one day he would return, and this time he wouldn't be the weak boy he once was. 20 years later, 20 years had passed. 20 years since Samuel left Shadow Valley with nothing but shame and resentment. Now he had returned, no longer the frail, helpless boy who had been tied to a tree in the town square. No longer Monkey Boy mocked and despised the sleek black Bentley rolled slowly into town, reflecting the blinding sunlight. The town's people stopped and turned to look. Who is that? A car that luxurious? Must be someone really rich. No, wait a minute. Could it be the car? Door opened. Samuel stepped out. A finely tailored black suit, polished leather shoes, a Swiss watch gleaming on his wrist. But what shocked people the most was his gaze, sharp, powerful, exuding authority. There was no trace of the timid child he once was. No more tears, no more weakness. Samuel had returned like a king. A woman gaped, dropping her basket of vegetables. A man nearly spilled his coffee down his shirt. Everyone recognized him, but no one dared to speak. It can't be. Is that Samuel Graham? Unbelievable. Those who had mocked and shunned him now stood frozen, silent. They had once looked at him with contempt. Now they looked at him with fear, and as Samuel said nothing, he simply walked past them, leaving them to wrestle with their own thoughts. There was still one more person, a name Samuel would never forget: Matthew Nelson, the one who had led the bullying, the one who had thrown rocks at him, stripped him of his shirt, tied him to a tree, the one who had laughed cruelly as Samuel cried in humiliation. Matthew had once the prince of the town, but now Samuel stepped into a rundown bar on the corner of the street. The air was heavy with the stench of cheap alcohol, wooden tables, old and battered, dim yellow lights flickering weakly. A man stood behind the bar, wiping the counter with a weary, lifeless expression, a familiar face, but now lined with wrinkles. Matthew Nelson, no longer arrogant, no longer cruel, no longer the feared ruler of the town, just a broken man worn down by life, with empty, hollow eyes. Matthew looked up when he saw Samuel's shock flickered across his face, then turned into fear, because he knew the man standing before him was no longer the weak little boy he once tormented. Samuel walked up to the bar and placed a bill on the counter. His voice was calm but cold. Long time no see of Matthew swallowed hard, his hand gripping the rag, trembling slightly. You, he stammered. Samuel smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. Surprised, aren't you? Matthew lowered his head, unable to meet Samuel's eyes. He knew he had lost, and Samuel had won. Samuel stepped into the rundown bar where Matthew Nelson was now working as a waiter. The air inside was dampened, musty, the dim yellow lights casting a dull glow over the scratched wooden tables. Drunken patrons laughed boisterously, but when Samuel appeared, some of them stopped staring at him in disbelief. He was no longer the weak boy who had once been humiliated. His expensive suit, polished leather shoes, chiseled face, and piercing gaze sent shivers down the spines of those who had once scorned him. Matthew was carrying a tray of beer to a table when he froze. At the sight of Samuel, his face turned pale, his eyes widened as if He couldn't believe what was happening. Samuel walked up to the bar, placing his hand on the wooden counter, his voice deep and firm. "Hello, Matthew. Long time. No." See, Matthew swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. He stammered, "WWH, why are you back?" Samuel smirked coldly. "To return what I endured." Matthew stiffened. He knew he was no longer the powerful boy who had once ruled the town back. Then he had his wealthy family's protection, a gang of followers, even teachers and townsfolk who turn a blind eye. But now he was nothing but a failure. While Samuel had risen stronger than ever, suddenly a customer waved his hand impatiently. "Hey, bring the beer over." Now Matthew lowered his head and quickly carried the tray to the table. He tried to ignore Samuel, but Samuel's gaze clung to him like a ghost from the past. Samuel waited. He wanted Matthew to face the truth, and the opportunity came sooner than expected. A drunk man swung his arm carelessly, knocking the tray from Matthew's hands. The bottles crashed onto the floor, shattering into pieces, beer foam splattering everywhere. The customer yelled, "What the hell are you doing? Clean this up now, you worthless waiter." Matthew trembled, immediately kneeling to pick up the shards. Samuel watched in silence. A quiet satisfaction crept into him. The one who had tormented him was now humiliated before a crowd. Samuel spoke deliberately, raising his voice so the entire bar could hear. "Last I remember, weren't you the king of this town? So why are you on your knees cleaning up beer now?" Matthew clenched his fists, his face flushing with anger and shame. The patrons began whispering. Some of them recognized Samuel, the boy who had once been bullied, now a successful man. What a joke. He used to act like he owned the place, and now he's a damn waiter. Ha! Someone laughed. Matthew couldn't take it anymore. He shot up, throwing the rag to the ground, and growled at Samuel. "What do you want? I'm broke. I've lost everything. Isn't that enough?" Samuel crossed his arms, staring him down. "I don't care whether you win or lose. I just want you to understand what it feels like to be despised by an entire town." Matthew let out a bitter laugh. "So you came back just to get revenge? I thought success would have made you more noble." Samuel stepped closer, his gaze no longer cold, but commanding. "Noble? Were you noble when you made me scream like a monkey in front of the whole town? When you threw rocks at me? When you made my mother cry in despair?" Matthew said nothing. He couldn't argue. Samuel kept his eyes on him, then calmly pulled a check from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "This is enough for you to leave this town and start over. But I have one condition." Matthew narrowed his eyes. "What condition?" "You stand in the town square, the same place where you humiliated me, and apologize." Matthew recoiled, shaking his head furiously. "No way. I'd rather die." Samuel smirked. "Then keep living this pathetic life." He turned and walked out of the bar, leaving Matthew standing there consumed by shame and resentment. The next morning, word spread through town. Matthew Nelson would stand in a town square to apologize to Samuel. A crowd gathered early. No one had ever imagined that the once arrogant Matthew would one day kneel before the very person he had tormented. Matthew stepped onto the platform in the square. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself under the curious and mocking gazes of the townspeople. Samuel stood there, hands in his pockets, watching calmly. Matthew swallowed hard and spoke. "I'm sorry." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone scoffed, "Louder, you sound like a damn mosquito." Matthew gritted his teeth, then shouted, "I'm sorry, Samuel. I was wrong. I bullied you. I treated you like trash. I regret it." The space remained silent for a few seconds before erupting into murmurs. Some people laughed mockingly, some nodded in acknowledgement, while others, those who had once sided with Matthew, felt a pang of guilt. Samuel stepped forward, looking at Matthew. He could see the bitterness in his old enemy's eyes, but he didn't care. He had won. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the check, and held it out to Matthew. "Take it and get out of this town." Matthew took the check, his hands trembling. He couldn't bring himself to meet Samuel's gaze. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away from the square, disappearing from the place that had once been his kingdom. Samuel exhaled deeply at last. He had closed a chapter of his life. He turned to the towns people, his sharp gaze scanning the crowd. "And what about the rest of you?" he asked those who laughed, while I was humiliated, those who looked the other way. "Do you have anything to say?" A heavy silence fell over the square. No one dared to speak. Samuel smirked, then turned on his heel. He had reclaimed justice for himself. After Matthew Nelson left town, Samuel felt a weight lift from his shoulders, but he knew there was still one thing. He couldn't let go of his mother, whom he had been estranged from for years, and his father, who had abandoned him. So crewy, he drove toward the old house where his mother had once lived. As the car rolled to a stop in front of the gate, his heart pounded. The house looked more worn than he remembered, but it was still there. The wooden porch, the small front yard with the wild flowers his mother used to tend. He stepped out of the car, took a deep breath, and walked up to the door. He knocked. The door creaked open. A middle-aged woman stood there, streaks of gray in her hair, dark eyes lined with the wrinkles of time and suffering. Samuel spoke softly, as if afraid to startle her mom. Eleanor froze her eyes, widened her hands, trembled. A second later, tears streamed down her gaunt face. "Samuel, my son." She rushed forward, wrapping her frail arms around him, holding him tightly as if he might disappear if she let go. Samuel stood still, feeling the warmth of the mother he had been apart from for 20 years. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I couldn't protect you. I let you go alone. I can never forgive myself." Her voice broke, each word cutting into Samuel's heart like a blade. He pulled her closer. "No, Mom. It wasn't your fault. I'm back now. You don't have to suffer anymore." Eleanor looked at her son, reaching out to touch his face, as if trying to confirm that he was real and not just a dream. "You've become a man, strong, successful. You did it, didn't you?" Samuel nodded. "Yes, I did it. I won." Eleanor smiled, but tears continued to fall. "I always believed you would come back. I prayed for you every single day." Samuel looked at his mother, seeing the marks left by time, loneliness, and hardship. "Mom, how have you been all these years?" he asked. She sighed. "After you left your father, he never looked for you. He kept drinking, drowning in his own bitterness and rage. Then one day, he left town without a word. I don't even know where he went." Samuel clenched his fists. His father had abandoned his mother, just as he had abandoned him. "Mom, if you want, I can take you with me. You don't have to stay here anymore." Eleanor looked around the small house. She had spent her whole life here, enduring pain, loneliness, and loss. She took Samuel's hand and shook her head gently. "No, son, this is my home. This is where I gave birth to you, where I raise you no matter what happens. I don't want to leave." Samuel remained silent. He understood, but his heart ached at the thought of everything his mother had endured. "Then I'll stay here with you for a while." The confrontation with his father the next day, an unexpected piece of news reached Samuel. His father, Michael, had returned to town. Samuel couldn't believe it. The man who had disappeared for 20 years, leaving his mother alone in pain and misery, now reappeared as if nothing had ever happened. He didn't hesitate. He needed to face him. That afternoon, Samuel went to the bar where his father was said to be. Michael sat alone in the corner, a cheap bottle of liquor in front of him. He had aged drastically. His hair was completely white, his face gaunt, his eyes clouded with alcohol and years of regret. Samuel walked over, pulled out a chair, and sat down across from him. Michael looked up, his dull eyes staring at him. "Who the hell are you?" Samuel clenched his fists, but held himself back. "I'm your son, Samuel." Michael flinched, his eyes widened as he struggled to focus on the young man in front of him. "You're that kid from back then?" "Yes, the kid you beat, you abandoned, the kid you never bothered to look for after throwing him out of the house." Michael exhaled heavily, then let out a bitter laugh. "You came back to humiliate me?" Samuel's gaze was ice cold. "No, I came back to ask you one thing." "Why?" Michael fell silent after a moment. He grabbed the bottle, took a long drink, then let out a scoffing chuckle. "Why? Because I'm 80, bastard. Because I lost a life. Because I was too weak to be a good father." Samuel's hands clenched tighter. "Then why come back now?" Michael laughed dryly. "Because I have nowhere else to go. I lost everything. And I thought maybe my wife is still here, still foolish enough to forgive me." Samuel laughed too, but it was not a joyful sound. "You think my mother would forgive you after everything you did?" Michael looked down at the table, saying nothing. Samuel stood up. "You are no longer my father. You don't deserve my mother. If you have any shred of conscience left, leave this town forever." Michael looked up, his gaze dark. "You don't have the right to tell me that." Samuel leaned down, his face inches from his father's. "I do. And if you go near my mother, I won't forgive you." He turned and walked away. Michael remained seated, gripping the bottle with trembling hands. Samuel knew his father had brought this fate upon himself. A new beginning for Shadow Valley. The town of Shadow Valley had completely changed. No longer was it a place of mockery, of scorn, of deep emotional wounds inflicted on the weak. And that change had begun with Samuel. After every he had been through, Samuel realized that revenge was not the best way to prove himself. He didn't need the fear of those who had once humiliated him, nor did he need their belated apologies. He wanted to create real change so that no one would have to suffer the way he once did. Samuel invested the wealth he had earned through years of hard work in the city to establish a charity called Hope Foundation. It was more than just financial aid. It was an organization dedicated to protecting bullied children, giving them a chance at a better life, providing them with education opportunities so that their past wounds wouldn't define their futures. At the foundation's opening ceremony, a large crowd gathered. Children who had once been abandoned, ridiculed, and bullied now stood before Samuel. Their eyes filled with admiration. They no longer saw him as the weak boy from the past. They saw him as someone who had risen above his suffering, someone who now stood as a protector for those who had once been like him. A little girl around 8 years old with long black hair timidly stepped toward him. Her name was Rose, a child who had been ostracized by her peers simply because her family was poor. She looked up at Samuel, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "Mr. Samuel, can I give you a hug?" Samuel smiled, kneeling down and gently wrapping his arms around her. The entire square erupted in applause. "Thank you." Rose clutched his hand tightly, her voice trembling with emotion. "Because of you, I'm not afraid to go to school anymore." Mrs. Isabella, an elderly woman who had once been Samuel's teacher, stepped onto the stage and took the microphone. She looked around the crowd, her eyes filled with pride. "Samuel is not just a resilient young man, but a truly great person. He did not choose the path of revenge. Instead, he chose to help others, children like Rose, so that no one else would have to endure what he once did." Today, we are not just witnessing the birth of this foundation, we are witnessing a transformation in the very heart of this town. The applause was deafening. Those who had once mocked Samuel now lowered their heads, avoiding his gaze. They felt ashamed, yet they were also silently grateful that he had not turned his back on the town, but instead had chosen to return and make it better. Many of those who had once ridiculed Samuel stood hidden among the crowd, unable to meet his eyes. Then Raymond, one of the ringleaders of Samuel's tormentors, stepped forward hesitantly. "Samuel, I'm sorry." His voice was barely audible, devoid of its former arrogance. Samuel stared at him in silence. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his tone calm but profound. "I used to hate you, Raymond, but now I don't need your apology. The only thing I ask of you is to treat people with kindness so that no one else will have to go through what I did." Raymond looked down, unable to say another word. He knew now Samuel no longer cared about his existence. He had been left behind, trapped in his own past. The ceremony ended, and Samuel stepped onto the highest platform in the town square, the very place where years ago he had been humiliated in front of everyone. But today, he stood there as a victor. He looked around, took a deep breath, and spoke. "When I left this town, they called me a monkey, but now that I've returned, they have to look up to me like a king." For a moment, the square fell into complete silence. Then a thunderous wave of applause and cheers erupted. The children looked at him with admiration shining in their eyes. A new chapter of Samuel's life had officially begun. He was no longer the weak, broken boy of the past. He was no longer a victim of cruel jokes. He had turned his pain into strength. He had transformed his wounds into a force for change. That night, Samuel stood on the balcony of his newly purchased mansion, gazing out over the town. The small place that had once been his personal hell now lay beneath his feet. 20 years ago, this town had tormented him, but now he had returned not as a hunted boy, but as the one in control. The night wind blew past, carrying the scent of the sea, but also whispering the echoes of old wounds. Samuel closed his eyes, feeling every scar imprinted on his soul. Tonight, everything would finally come to an end. The town buzzed with rumors about Samuel Graham's upcoming announcement. The wealthy businessman who had been buying up land here had something important to say. Some whispered about his past, but no one dared to speak it aloud. Samuel stepped onto the podium, his calm gaze sweeping over the crowd. "I did not return for revenge," he said, his voice steady and powerful. "I came back to change this place." The audience fell silent. "I have acquired most of this town. The businesses that exploited the poor will be shut down. I will build schools, hospitals, and create jobs for those willing to work hard." Some people began clapping, but others, those tied to the past, could not accept this change. From the shadows, Matthew Nelson stepped forward. He was disheveled, his face covered in stubble, his eyes burning with hatred. "You think you can buy us all off, Matthew? Spat, you're still just that filthy little kid. A monkey, nothing more." Sam stepped down from the podium, walking toward him for the first time. They stood face to face, not as the weak child and the powerful bully, but as two men whose fates had diverged in opposite directions. "I used to hate you," Samuel said slowly, "but now I only pity you." Matthew clenched his fists, trembling with rage. He lunged at Samuel, but the guards quickly restrained him. Samuel didn't even bother looking back. He had already moved beyond. Matthew far beyond. Later that night, Samuel stood by the sea, listening to the waves crash against the rocks. The salty wind ruffled his hair, carrying with it the ghosts of his past and the promise of his future. He had not returned to drown himself in hatred. He had come back to end this chapter of his life. Now that everything was over, he asked himself, "What do I truly want?" That evening, as he drove through the small road leading to the old marketplace, something caught his eye, a familiar figure, Claire, the only person who had ever stood by him all those years ago. She was tidying up the small roadside cafe, her face still gentle, but now etched with the weariness of time. Samuel pulled over, stepped out of the car, and slowly approached her. Claire. She turned around, startled. Her brown eyes widened in shock, then gradually softened as recognition set in. "Samuel," her voice trembled. "Is it really you?" He nodded, smiling slightly. Stared at him for a long moment, then suddenly laughed. But there was a hint of regret in her eyes. "You've changed so much. You look like a successful businessman now." "Just life pushing me around," Samuel replied. "What about you?" Claire sighed. "I stayed here. My family couldn't afford to go anywhere else, so I took over this cafe for my mother." "Are you happy?" She was silent for a moment before softly saying, "Maybe I am, but sometimes I'm not." Samuel understood. In a small town full of prejudice like this, a girl like Claire had surely faced many difficulties. He suddenly felt a pang of regret for her and for their past. "Will the cafe be open tomorrow?" Samuel asked. Claire nodded. "Do you want to come for a coffee?" "Maybe." He smiled. "It's been a long time since I had a proper cup of coffee." Claire watched 51:15 him walk away, a strange feeling welling up inside her, a mix of nostalgia and anticipation. The next morning, Samuel strolled around town. No more scornful glances, no more whispers. Now everyone looked at him differently, with a mix of respect and hesitation. He stepped into CLA's cafe. It was still the same small space from years ago, but she had arranged it more neatly, making it feel warmer. "Samuel, you actually came." Claire smiled when she saw him walking. "Your coffee is too good to resist," he joked. CLA chuckled and made him a cup of coffee herself. As she placed the cup on the table, Samuel said slowly, "I'm planning to stay here for a while." CLA looked at him in surprise. "Really? But you have so many opportunities out there." "Maybe, but I want to change this place, to turn it into somewhere no one has to suffer the same injustice as I did." CLA was silent for a long moment, then smiled softly. "If you really do that, I believe this town will become a better place." A week later, Samuel announced a project to revitalize the town. He invested in building a new school, creating more jobs, and supporting struggling families. No one dared look down on him anymore. As for Matthew Nelson, he had left town after their last confrontation. No one knew where he went, but no one cared. His days of running wild were over. Edward, his father, still lived alone in the old house. Samuel had once thought about revenge, but then he realized there was no punishment greater than a lifetime of loneliness. He never went back to see him. Instead, he spent time with his mother. Rose could now smile more, seeing her son happy, and Samuel slowly found peace within himself. One late afternoon, Samuel and CLA sat together by the beach, watching the fiery sunset on the horizon. "Have you ever thought about leaving this place?" CLA asked. Samuel shook his head. "I used to, but not anymore, because I found a reason to stay." So I smiled, turning to look at him. "Me too." The sun gradually set over the sea, carrying away the scars of the past. Tomorrow, a new life would begin, no longer filled with hatred, only hope. Samuel's story teaches us that revenge is not the best way to prove oneself. Instead of drowning in hatred, he chose to turn his pain into motivation, helping those who had suffered injustices like he once did. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is a way to move forward, making those who once looked down on him feel ashamed. True strength does not lie in defeating enemies, but in creating positive change. To win, stand up and become the best version of yourself. If you enjoy this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon. equals 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 equals. Certainly. Here is a 1,350-word narrative based on the story you provided and summarized points, written in English for an American audience. Understood. Underscore. The story of Samuel Graham, a tale of rejection, resilience, and redemption. In the small, secluded town of Shadow Valley, Samuel Graham's story began with a tragedy that would shape his life forever. Born with a facial deformity, Samuel's appearance was considered grotesque by the standards of his family and community. His father, Edward Graham, made it clear from the moment Samuel took his first breath that he was not welcome in this world. Edward's immediate reaction was one of revulsion and disbelief as he scorned his wife, Rose, and her newborn son. The hatred Edward felt for his child was not subtle. "What kind of monstrosity have you given birth to?" Edward growled at his wife, his words cutting through the room with venom. Rose, devastated by her husband's words, could only cradle her son in her arms, tears streaming down her face. She loved Samuel, but she lacked the strength to stand up to Edward. Samuel's early years were filled with rejection, not just from his father, but from the entire town. From the start, Samuel had never known love from his father. Edward never held him, never called him by name, and went out of his way to ignore the child he had fathered. The people in Shadow Valley, too, treated Samuel with disdain. They whispered behind his back, calling him Monkey Boy, a name that would follow him through his childhood. At first, Samuel didn't understand why people were cruel to him, but as he grew older, the harsh words and mocking laughter became all too familiar. The town, known for its close-knit, conservative community, didn't take kindly to those who were different. Samuel's appearance, with large ears and thick eyebrows, set him apart from the other children. It was enough to make the entire town view him as an outcast. Adults in the town would pull their children close when Samuel passed by, warning them to stay away from the monster. The name Monkey Boy became synonymous with Samuel in Shadow Valley, and the bullying only grew worse with time. Samuel wanted to fit in. He longed for the friendships other children took for granted. But every time he tried to approach a group of kids, they would recoil in disgust. He would ask to play with them, only to be met with cruel laughter and harsh rejection. One day, a group of children playing soccer in the town square humiliated him further. When Samuel timidly asked if he could play, a boy named Peter mocked him, saying, "Play a monkey like he knows how to play soccer?" The kids laughed as Peter kicked the ball into Samuel's face, sending him tumbling to the ground, blood pouring from his nose. These moments of cruelty became a daily occurrence for Samuel. His heart ached every time he returned home, hoping for some comfort, but his mother, Rose, could only offer silent tears. She loved Samuel deeply, but was too weak to stand up to Edward. His father's hatred was palpable. Edward openly blamed Rose for giving birth to Samuel, accusing her of causing his humiliation in front of the neighbors. Every time Samuel witnessed this cruelty, he felt further abandoned, not just by his father, but by the whole town. Despite all the pain and rejection, there was one person who showed Samuel any kindness. Mrs. Helen, an elderly woman who lived near the market, would occasionally offer him a piece of bread when she saw him hiding in the corner, trying to avoid the jeering eyes of the other villagers. One afternoon, when Mrs. Helen offered him some bread, she looked at him with warmth and compassion, saying, "Don't let their cruel words define who you are." Though this small act of kindness made Samuel feel seen, it didn't change the harshness of the town around him. The whispers continued, and Samuel became more isolated than ever. His days were filled with loneliness, and the bullying escalated. Matthew Nelson, the son of one of the wealthiest families in town, became his primary tormentor. Matthew's cruelty knew no bounds. He didn't just bully Samuel because of his looks. He bullied him because he enjoyed it. The Nelson family's wealth and influence shielded Matthew from any consequences. Samuel had no one to turn to. Even his teachers, including Mr. Frank, turned a blind eye to the abuse he suffered. Samuel's bruises went unnoticed, and the laughter of his classmates echoed through his every day. One particularly cruel incident occurred when Matthew and his friends filled Samuel's backpack with bananas, mocking him further by calling him a monkey. When Samuel tried to stand up for himself, the situation only worsened. He slapped the bananas off the table in anger, but Matthew responded with a punch, sending Samuel crashing to the ground. No one intervened, and the class erupted in laughter. The cycle of abuse continued. One rainy afternoon, Matthew and his friends dragged Samuel into the town square and tied him to a tree, forcing him to scream like a monkey for their amusement. As the rain poured down, Samuel's humiliation reached its peak. The townspeople watched passively, some even recording the scene on their phones, while others merely laughed at his suffering. Samuel screamed, not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. His tormentors had won. When Samuel arrived home that day, he found no solace. Edward, his father, coldly remarked that Samuel got what he deserved. "A freak like you never deserved love in the first place," Edward sneered. These words shattered Samuel's already fragile heart. His father, the one person who should have loved and protected him, was the very one who despised him the most. In that moment, Samuel knew he was truly alone in the world. With nowhere else to turn, Samuel left Shadow Valley on a stormy night, a mere child with nothing but his ragged clothes. He walked through the pouring rain, not knowing where he was going, but determined to escape the hellish existence he had known. After 2 days of wandering, he reached New Haven, a bustling city that offered him no warmth, no love, and no comfort. Samuel survived by begging for food and sleeping on the streets, his body shivering from the cold. But Samuel's story did not end in despair. His resilience began to take shape when he found work as a dishwasher at a small restaurant. The owner, Mr. Ramsey, wasn't particularly kind, but he offered Samuel a meal at the end of each long, grueling day. Samuel worked tirelessly, washing dishes in cold water, but he never complained. Every penny he earned was carefully saved. At night, when the restaurant closed, Samuel studied. He borrowed books on software programming from the library and spent hours learning to code. Despite his lack of resources, Samuel's determination never wavered. Eventually, he began taking on small freelance jobs online, earning money by fixing websites and writing simple software scripts. For the first time in his life, Samuel felt valuable. Years passed, and Samuel's skills grew. He built a small software company from nothing, investing every penny he had earned. Slowly but surely, Samuel transformed his life. He earned a reputation in the tech industry, and the very people who had once mocked him were now using the products he created. 20 years after he left Shadow Valley, Samuel returned, no longer the weak, broken boy he once was. He drove into town in a sleek black Bentley, dressed in a finely tailored suit, exuding confidence and authority. The people who had once scorned him now watched in awe and fear as he walked past them. Samuel had become a man of power, no longer the victim of the town's cruelty. His first stop was the bar where Matthew Nelson, his former tormentor, now worked as a waiter. The once arrogant Matthew was now a broken man, humiliated by life's circumstances. Samuel approached him calmly, and without a hint of malice, demanded an apology for the years of torment Matthew had inflicted on him. Matthew, humbled and defeated, offered a half-hearted apology, which Samuel accepted without emotion. But Samuel's victory wasn't about revenge. It was about creating change. He had not returned to seek retribution, but to transform the town that had once broken him. He used the wealth he had earned to establish a charity, the Hope Foundation, dedicated to helping children who had been bullied and ostracized, just as he had been. At the foundation's opening ceremony, The townspeople stood in awe as Samuel, the once despised boy, was now their savior. The children he helped looked up to him with admiration, no longer seeing him as the weak, monkey boy, but as a beacon of hope. Samuel's story, one of pain, struggle, and resilience, had come full circle. He had not only overcome the hatred and cruelty of his past, but had used it as fuel to build a better future. Through his actions, Samuel taught the people of Shadow Valley and the world a valuable lesson. True strength is not in seeking revenge, but in creating positive change. His rise from the depths of despair to a place of influence and compassion showed that no matter how dark the past may be, there is always a way to rise above it, make a difference, and find peace. Samuel's return to Shadow Valley marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for him, but for the entire town. His story proved that with resilience, perseverance, and a commitment to helping others, anyone can overcome the harshest of circumstances and transform their pain into something that benefits the greater good. In the end, Samuel's greatest triumph wasn't in making his tormentors apologize. It was in choosing forgiveness, creating change, and helping others find the strength to rise above their own struggles. Underscore. This story of resilience and redemption exemplifies how personal pain can be transformed into strength for positive change, especially within a community. Certainly, here's a 1,000-word narrative based on the content and summary you provided, written in English for an American audience. Underscore. The story of Maya, a journey of strength, love, and overcoming adversity. In a small town, where the world moves a little slower and everything seems more intimate, Maya's life took an unexpected turn. A petite, young woman with a childlike appearance, Maya's life became a tale not of weakness, but of extraordinary strength and resilience in the face of judgment, adversity, and an almost insurmountable medical condition. Maya's story began under tragic circumstances that defied logic and expectation. A rare condition known as pituitary dwarfism kept Maya's body from growing and maturing outwardly. She was 27 years old, yet her physical appearance resembled that of a child. Despite her fully developed internal organs and a body that was otherwise mature, Maya's external form was frozen in time. This physical anomaly set the stage for the challenges she would face throughout her life. Her journey was not only defined by her medical condition, but also by the painful rejections she faced from society. People often mistook her for a child, leading to awkward conversations, snide comments, and at times, outright ridicule. The world saw her as something other than what she truly was, and this misjudgment shaped her reality in ways few could comprehend. Her life became a constant battle to prove she was more than her appearance, a challenge that was both physically and emotionally exhausting. However, Maya did not let this condition define her. Despite the way people looked at her, she remained determined to live her life with dignity and purpose. She found solace in her passion for teaching, becoming an English teacher, which was a source of pride and fulfillment. Though her students respected her skills, the constant battle to be treated as an equal took a toll. While her students admired her knowledge, the people around her often questioned her age and ability. Maya's self-worth wasn't tied to her appearance, but the constant need to assert this truth became her reality. One day, during a routine English lesson, Maya's life took a drastic and unexpected turn. She began experiencing sharp abdominal pain that quickly escalated. Uncertainty and fear gripped her as she collapsed. In the panic of the moment, her student, Paul, rushed to her aid, calling for help. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew that Maya needed urgent care. He carried her to the hospital, desperate for someone to help the woman who had taught him so much about life and language. At the hospital, Maya's condition quickly became a topic of concern, and doctors were thrown into a state of confusion. As the medical team worked to stabilize her, they soon realized that Maya was in labor, but the shocking part wasn't just the fact that she was pregnant. It was that she was only 9 years old in terms of her external appearance. The doctors were left speechless, unsure of what was happening, but determined to save both Maya and her child. The confusion surrounding Maya's condition led to a series of unfortunate events. As she was rushed into surgery, doctors and nurses around her questioned how someone with her appearance could possibly be in labor. It wasn't just the doctors who were puzzled, but the people in the waiting room, including hospital staff and the general public, who were quick to jump to conclusions. Whispers filled the air, with many assuming the worst. They assumed Paul was responsible for Maya's pregnancy and that he had taken advantage of a child. The blame quickly shifted to Paul, and the situation spiraled into something much darker. He found himself detained by the police, accused of a crime he didn't commit. Despite the love and care he had for Maya, the people around him did not see him as a hero or a protector. Instead, they viewed him as a perpetrator, and no amount of explanation seemed to change their minds. Even the officers were skeptical of his story, unsure whether to believe him or not. In the midst of the chaos, Maya had her baby, a healthy baby boy. Despite the pain she was enduring, Maya was determined to be a mother. She wanted to hold her child, and when she finally did, the tears of gratitude she shed spoke volumes. But the relief she felt was short-lived as she was confronted with the accusations against Paul. She knew the truth, and she stood by him, refusing to let their bond be severed by the judgments of others. As the investigation continued, the truth began to surface. Maya had a rare medical condition, and the pregnancy had been the result of a long-term relationship she had been in before. Unfortunately, the man she had loved and trusted had abandoned her when she became pregnant. He had disappeared, leaving Maya to face the challenges of motherhood alone, and worse still, leaving her to battle a world that would never accept her for who she truly was. But Maya was not one to give up. Paul, devastated by the accusations against him, stood by Maya's side throughout her ordeal. He never wavered in his dedication to her and her child, and his love for them grew stronger each day. He realized that Maya was not just a woman struggling with an unusual condition. She was someone with a heart full of love, kindness, and incredible strength. In the face of adversity, she had chosen to fight, not for revenge, but for the future of her child. As the legal proceedings moved forward, the truth about Maya's medical condition and Paul's innocence became clearer. The police, who had initially treated Paul as a criminal, began to understand the situation. Maya's previous medical records confirmed her condition, and the truth was finally acknowledged. It was a relief, but it didn't erase the pain and suffering they had already endured. Despite everything that happened, Maya was determined not to be defined by the tragedy that had befallen her. She was not a victim of her condition, nor was she a victim of society's harsh judgments. She was a mother who loved her child, and she was determined to give him the best life possible. She wanted to be an example of strength, resilience, and the power of love. In the days that followed, Maya continued to recover from the physical toll of childbirth. Though her appearance still caused confusion for many, she was undeterred. She remained steadfast in her commitment to her son and to living a life filled with purpose. Paul, who had once feared the judgment of others, found himself growing stronger in his own right. The love they shared and the bond they had built became their foundation. The world around them may have judged them, but together they had created something that no one could take away: love. As time passed, the healing process continued for both Maya and Paul. The pain of the past was not easily forgotten, but it was overshadowed by the joy they found in each other and in the life they were building together. Maya's condition would always be a part of her story, but it would not define her. She was more than the sum of her physical appearance. She was a woman who had endured unimaginable hardship, and in doing so, have become a symbol of hope for others who face their own battles. The love between Maya and Paul became an inspiration to those around them. Their story showed that love, trust, and unwavering dedication could overcome even the darkest of circumstances. Maya's journey was not just about surviving. It was about thriving despite the odds stacked against her. It was a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of a mother's love. As they settled into their new life, Maya, Paul, and their son looked forward to a future where they could finally live without fear, without judgment, and without the scars of the past holding them back. They had found strength in each other, and in doing so, they had created a new chapter filled with hope, possibility, and the promise of a better tomorrow. Maya's story, one of unexpected hardship, is a powerful reminder that no matter the challenges we face, love and determination can help us rise above them. It teaches us that true strength comes not from the absence of difficulty, but from the courage to face it and the resilience to keep moving forward. Underscore. This 1,000-word story is centered around Maya's journey of overcoming her medical condition and societal rejection, illustrating how love and resilience can bring light in even the darkest of circumstances. It speaks to themes of strength, love, and the power of community support. Certainly, here is the 700-word narrative based on the content and summary you provided, written in English for an American audience. The Journey of Redemption, a tale of strength and forgiveness. In a town where every corner echoed with whispers, Samuel Graham's early years were steeped in rejection and torment. From a moment of his birth, Samuel had been the object of his father Edward's disdain. With an appearance that deviated from what Edward considered acceptable, Samuel was labeled a monstrosity. His physical features, large ears, thick eyebrows, and round eyes, being blamed on his mother, Rose. Edward's bitter scorn was evident, and it wasn't just an emotional rejection. It was a violent, cruel stance that Samuel had to endure day after day. Edward couldn't hide his disgust for his son. Instead of affection, Samuel received constant ridicule. The streets of Shadow Valley were filled with people gossiping about him, calling him Monkey Boy. The adults didn't spare him, and the children mimicked their behavior, calling out insults and avoiding him at every turn. Samuel would walk through the town with his head hung low, hoping for some glimmer of acceptance. But the stares and comments only became more merciless. The emotional toll of such rejection was compounded by the behavior of his own mother, Rose. Though she loved Samuel dearly, Rose lacked the strength to defend him from Edward's cruelty or to stand up against the town's judgment. When she wasn't comforting Samuel in secret, she was silently enduring the same scorn from her own community for bearing such a child. It wasn't until the day Samuel was tied to a tree in the town square, humiliated in front of the entire town, that he realized how deep his pain ran. He was forced to scream like a monkey, his cries drowning in the laughter and taunts of the townspeople. It was the pinnacle of Samuel's suffering, and from that day, he knew nothing would ever be the same again. But Samuel didn't let the abuse break him completely. He didn't have the tools or support to escape the nightmare immediately. But the idea of change, of becoming something more than the bullied child the town saw, began to fester in his mind. He needed a new beginning, one that didn't involve revenge, but rather a complete transformation of his life. After leaving Shadow Valley, Samuel wandered to New Haven, a city that offered him both the isolation and the opportunity he so desperately needed. Without money, family, or friends, Samuel found himself begging on the streets, his body thin and weak. It was a brutal existence, but Samuel never gave up. He worked odd jobs, finding whatever means necessary to survive, from washing dishes at a small restaurant to taking on manual labor. But through it all, his drive for a better life kept him going. His nights were spent learning, reading newspapers, books, and anything he could get his hands on that would help him develop the skills to change his fate. Samuel's curiosity soon led him to the world of technology. One afternoon, he overheard a group of customers discussing software programming, something he had never encountered before but knew could be his way out. From then on, Samuel dove headfirst into the world of coding. He had no computer of his own, but he spent every free moment at the public library teaching himself how to write code, fix software bugs, and build websites. His ability to absorb knowledge quickly became his greatest asset. As the years passed, Samuel's relentless drive paid off. He worked on freelance projects, and over time, he built a name for himself in the tech world. What started as small jobs eventually blossomed into a successful software company. Samuel wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. The man who once begged for food now had a thriving business, a new identity, and the skills to shape his future. Yet, despite his success, there was one thing Samuel couldn't escape: the pain of his past. He hadn't forgotten Shadow Valley, and the thought of the people who had tormented him lingered in the back of his mind. 20 years later, Samuel returned to the town that had caused him so much pain. But this time, things were different. Samuel was no longer the broken boy they had once known. He arrived in a black Bentley, dressed in a tailored suit, his face sharp and commanding. His arrival stunned the townspeople. They couldn't believe their eyes. This was no longer the weak child they had tormented. He was now a man of power, authority, and wealth. His first stop was the local bar where Matthew Nelson, the son of the wealthiest family in the town, worked as a waiter. Matthew, who had led the bullying Samuel faced years ago, was visibly shaken when he saw Samuel. The man who had once mocked him was now someone who had everything Matthew had never been able to achieve. Samuel didn't need to seek revenge on Matthew. His mere presence was enough to show the world that Samuel had won. The ultimate moment of redemption came when Samuel made Matthew publicly apologize for all the cruelty he had inflicted upon him. The people who had once looked at Samuel with contempt now watched as their former tormentor was forced to bow his head in shame. Samuel didn't revel in Matthew's humiliation, nor did he feel the need to punish him further. He had already done enough by achieving success. His victory wasn't about getting back at those who had wronged him. It was about proving to himself that he could rise above their cruelty. Samuel's triumph didn't stop with Matthew. He used his wealth and influence to create a charity called the Hope Foundation, which aimed to help children who had faced the same kind of bullying and rejection he had. Through the foundation, Samuel was able to make a real difference in the lives of children who felt powerless, just as he had once felt. It became his mission to ensure that no child would have to endure the suffering he had gone through. In the end, Samuel realized that revenge had no place in his life. He didn't need to tear down others to lift himself up. His success, his resilience, and his ability to forgive were the true measures of his strength. He had transformed his pain into a force for good, showing that with perseverance and determination, one could overcome even the darkest of pasts. Samuel's journey from humiliation to redemption is a testament to the power of strength, forgiveness, and the resilience of a human spirit. His story is a reminder that our past does not define us. Our actions and choices do. And in choosing to rise above the hatred and cruelty he once faced, Samuel not only transformed his own life, but the lives of others as well. This 700-word piece highlights the journey of Samuel Graham as he overcomes years of bullying, rejection, and cruelty, ultimately finding success and peace through forgiveness and creating a better future. The story reflects themes of resilience, the power of overcoming adversity, and the importance of turning past trauma into motivation for positive change. Certainly, here's the 700-word narrative based on the content and summary you provided, written in English for an American audience. A journey of redemption, rising above rejection and finding strength. The town of Shadow Valley was one that seemed to be stuck in time, where its residents clung to old ways, judging those who didn't fit the mold. Samuel Graham's life was a testament to the brutality that such a small town could harbor. From the moment he was born, Samuel's life was marked by rejection, starting with his own father, Edward Graham, who saw his son as nothing more than a source of shame. Samuel's appearance, with large ears, thick eyebrows, and round eyes, was the source of his father's disdain, as he was viewed as a monstrosity. Edward could not bear to look at him, often making cruel remarks that tore at the fabric of Samuel's sense of self-worth. But it wasn't just his father who rejected Samuel. The town of Shadow Valley, too, seemed to label him as an outsider. Whispers followed him wherever he went, and the children of the town would mock him, calling him Monkey Boy. At first, Samuel didn't understand why he was treated this way, but as he grew, the painful reality set in. The laughter, the cruelty, and the isolation became his constant companions. The rejection from his peers and the cold indifference from his own father led him into a deep, silent despair. As he tried to seek refuge from the bullying, Samuel found himself trapped in a cycle of humiliation. Whenever he approached a group of children, they would back away, some even screaming for their parents to protect them from the monster. The adults weren't any better. They often whispered about him, talking about how he was a bad omen. Samuel had done nothing to deserve this cruelty. He was just a child, yet no one seemed to care. His father, Edward, showed no interest in protecting him. In fact, he blamed Samuel for the shame he felt, with cruel remarks that left scars deeper than any physical wounds. But through it all, Samuel was not entirely alone. There was one person in the town who showed him kindness, Mrs. Helen, an elderly woman who lived near the market. Mrs. Helen was the only one who ever smiled at Samuel, who ever spoke to him with any warmth. One afternoon, while Samuel was hiding in the corner of the market to avoid the prying eyes of the townspeople, Mrs. Helen approached him with a piece of bread, offering it to him with a kind, understanding gaze. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. Don't let their cruel words define who you are. For the first time in his life, Samuel felt a glimmer of hope. But even that small act of kindness couldn't change the town's collective cruelty. The townspeople's mockery only intensified, and the situation worsened when Samuel was humiliated in front of the entire town. He was tied to a tree in the town square, forced to scream like a monkey while Matthew Nelson, the son of the wealthiest family in the town, and his friends laughed at his misery. The video of the incident quickly spread, and Samuel became the subject of even more ridicule. With no support from his family, Samuel turned inward, seeking an escape in the form of self-preservation. His pain became his driving force. He couldn't stay in Shadow Valley any longer, so he left. He wandered through the streets, eventually finding his way to New Haven, a large city full of opportunities and challenges. But it wasn't the city's bustling streets that Samuel found overwhelming. It was the hunger, the loneliness, and the brutal cold of survival. Yet, Samuel refused to give in. He endured whatever job came his way, whether it was washing dishes or carrying heavy loads at the marketplace. Slowly, he began to learn more about the world of technology, which opened new doors for him. He spent countless nights reading newspapers, borrowing books, and practicing what he could learn about software programming. With time, he became skilled in this field, and his first freelance job in technology marked the turning point in his life. Years passed, and Samuel's efforts began to pay off. He started a software company, using every penny he saved from his grueling work to fund it. His company grew, and Samuel's name became recognized in the tech world. The boy who once begged for food now had a thriving business. Despite his success, Samuel never forgot the town that had torn him down and the pain he had suffered at the hands of Matthew and others. 20 years after leaving, Samuel returned to Shadow Valley, but this time he was no longer the weak, bullied boy. He arrived in a sleek black Bentley, dressed in a sharp suit, exuding confidence and authority. The townspeople who had once mocked him were stunned into silence. They couldn't believe the man who had once been the subject of their ridicule was now standing before them, successful and powerful. One of Samuel's first stops was at a rundown bar where Matthew Nelson worked as a waiter. Matthew had once tormented Samuel, but now the tables had turned. Samuel didn't need to seek revenge. His success was enough of a statement. But there was something Samuel needed to do. He made Matthew publicly apologize for all the cruelty he had inflicted on him. The once feared Matthew was now humiliated in front of everyone. But Samuel didn't revel in the moment. He had already moved beyond his tormentors. Samuel used his wealth to create the Hope Foundation, a charity aimed at helping children who had faced the same rejection he had. The foundation provided support for bullied children, offering them opportunities for education and a brighter future. Through the foundation, Samuel became a beacon of hope for those who had once been cast aside, just as he had been. His return to Shadow Valley marked the end of a painful chapter in Samuel's life. He didn't need revenge to prove his worth. His success, his resilience, and his ability to forgive were the true measures of his strength. Samuel's journey from humiliation to triumph is a powerful reminder that our past does not define us, our actions do. And in Samuel's case, his ability to rise above the cruelty and rejection he once faced made him a hero to those who had once cast him aside. His story shows us that even the deepest wounds can be transformed into the greatest sources of strength. Certainly, here's a 700-word narrative based on the content and summary you provided, written in English for an American audience. A journey of overcoming adversity, from rejection to redemption. Samuel Graham's life began with rejection. Born in Shadow Valley, a small town where gossip and judgment reigned supreme, Samuel entered the world under the most disheartening of circumstances. His father, Edward, looked at him with disgust from the very moment he was born. Samuel's appearance, with his large ears, thick eyebrows, and round eyes, didn't match the expectations of the Graham family. Edward, unable to hide his disdain, even questioned whether the child was his own. The hurtful words were just the beginning of a long life of rejection, not only from his father, but from the entire town. Samuel's mother, Rose, loved her son deeply, but she was too afraid of her domineering husband to stand up for him. Samuel's early years were marked by neglect from his father and scorn from the outside world. As Samuel grew older, the cruel gossip spread throughout the town. Monkey Boy, they called him. Some adults in the town even whispered that he was a bad omen. Samuel, a mere child, had done nothing to deserve such treatment, yet no one cared to defend him. The taunting continued relentlessly. In school, things didn't improve. Children avoided him, and when he tried to play or interact with others, they either ignored him or bullied him. One particularly painful memory was when Samuel approached a group of children playing soccer in the town square. He asked shyly if he could join, but instead of a friendly invitation, he was met with laughter and mockery. One boy kicked the ball into Samuel's face, causing him to fall to the ground in pain. Laughter echoed around him, leaving Samuel humiliated and confused. Why did everyone hate him so much? He just wanted to be like the other kids. But Samuel's torment didn't end with the children. The adults in the town treated him with the same disdain. As Samuel grew older, his father's rejection grew more apparent. Edward would openly mock Samuel, calling him a monster and a disgrace. Rose could do nothing but cry in silence, unable to protect her son from her abusive husband. Samuel, unable to understand why his father hated him so much, felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He could find no escape from the cruelty that surrounded him. However, there was one person in the town who didn't look at Samuel with scorn: Mrs. Helen, an elderly woman who lived near the market. Mrs. Helen would often offer Samuel small gestures of kindness, such as a piece of bread when he was hungry or a gentle smile when others avoided him. Her kindness was a rare light in Samuel's dark world, but even her compassion couldn't change the cruelty of the town. Samuel's life seemed to be a never-ending cycle of rejection, pain, and loneliness. The day came when Samuel's suffering reached its peak. One afternoon, while walking home from school, he was confronted by Matthew Nelson, the son of the wealthiest family in town. Matthew and his friends had always taunted Samuel, but today was different. They cornered him in a secluded street, and Matthew, fueled by his power and hatred, began to physically assault Samuel. He threw rocks at him, hitting him in the back and legs. The other boys joined in, laughing as Samuel tried to shield himself. This brutal attack marked the final straw for Samuel. That night, Samuel couldn't take it anymore. He left Shadow Valley, leaving behind the town and the people who had tormented him for so long. He had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, but he refused to return to the life of humiliation he had endured. He wandered through the streets, barely surviving, before finally finding his way to New Haven, a large city where he could start over. In New Haven, Samuel was forced to take on any job he could find. He worked as a dishwasher, carrying heavy loads at the marketplace and cleaning floors in grocery stores. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it kept him alive. Over time, Samuel discovered a newfound interest in technology. He began learning about software programming, borrowing books, and practicing his skills every night after work. Despite his meager circumstances, Samuel's thirst for knowledge grew stronger. He realized that technology might be his way out of the life he had been forced into. Eventually, Samuel's hard work paid off. He began to earn money from small freelance jobs, and before long, he had enough to start his own software company. With his savings and determination, Samuel built a business from the ground up. The boy who had once been mocked as Monkey Boy was now making a name for himself in the tech industry. His success was a testament to his resilience. But Samuel didn't forget the people who had once tormented him. 20 years after leaving Shadow Valley, Samuel returned. But this time, he was no longer the weak, helpless boy who had been ridiculed. He arrived in a sleek black Bentley, dressed in a fine suit, and exuded an air of confidence and power that stunned the townspeople. They could hardly believe their eyes. The boy they had once mocked had returned, not as a victim, but as a man who had risen above his pain. Samuel's first stop was a rundown bar where Matthew Nelson now worked as a waiter. Samuel didn't need to seek revenge, but he wanted Matthew to understand the pain he had caused. He made Matthew publicly apologize for his cruelty, forcing him to confront the torment he had inflicted on Samuel all those years ago. The once powerful Matthew was now a broken man, humiliated in front of everyone. Samuel didn't stop there. He invested his wealth into creating the Hope Foundation, a charity dedicated to helping bullied children. The foundation provided education, support, and opportunities for children who had suffered as Samuel had. In doing so, Samuel ensured that no child would ever have to endure the cruelty and rejection that he had experienced. His return to Shadow Valley was not for revenge. It was for change. Samuel had learned that true strength didn't come from hurting others, but from lifting others up. He had overcome his past, not by seeking vengeance, but by creating a future where kindness and compassion were the true measures of strength. Samuel's story is a powerful reminder that no matter how dark our past may be, we have the power to rise above it and create a better future for ourselves and those around us. Certainly, below is a 720-word narrative based on the content and summary you provided, written in English for an American audience. Underscore. The story of overcoming adversity, how a woman's determination changed her life. Lucy's life was not supposed to be this way. Born into a world of rejection and scorn, her existence was marred by a birthmark that set her apart from others. From the moment she entered the world, her parents, particularly her father, rejected her for being different. The deep red birthmarks stretched across her face, from her forehead down to her cheek, making her look like a cursed child in the eyes of her family. Isabella, her mother, did not possess the courage to defy her husband. While she loved her daughter deeply, she was too afraid to stand up to Richard, her cruel and domineering husband. When Lucy was born, Richard's harsh words about her appearance only made matters worse. He couldn't bear the idea of having a child that was ugly and would bring shame to the family's reputation. Isabella, too fearful to stand up to him, chose to remain silent. This deep rejection by her parents was only the beginning of Lucy's struggle. Her birthmark made her the target of ridicule from others in the town. Children at school avoided her, calling her the monster or the cursed one. Adults whispered about her behind her back, avoiding any interaction with the young girl. No one was willing to accept her, and Lucy began to internalize their judgment and hatred. Despite the cruelty she faced, Lucy always found solace in one person: Rose, a kind elderly woman who lived in a small cottage near the forest. Rose saw beyond Lucy's birthmark and accepted her for who she was. When Lucy was abandoned by her parents, it was Rose who took her in and gave her love and comfort. Although the small village, where everyone rejected Lucy, whispered cruel words behind her back, Rose remained steadfast. She offered Lucy the only unconditional love she had ever known. However, Lucy's life didn't improve in the village. Every time she ventured outside, she faced rejection from the people around her. The cruel words and stares of the villagers weighed heavily on Lucy's heart. It was the kind of pain that seemed to have no end. Her dream of attending school and making friends was dashed when she was told she wasn't welcome in the classroom. Even the headmaster, who was supposed to protect her, bowed to the prejudice of the other parents and refused to let Lucy attend school. While the villagers and her parents continued to treat her like an outcast, Lucy grew more resilient. She continued to study in secret, reading any books she could find, and learning from Rose, who encouraged her to keep going despite the obstacles in her way. But when Rose grew sick, Lucy's world turned even darker. Without her grandmother's warmth and care, Lucy was left alone to face the harshness of the world. Her struggles became even more intense when she tried to find work. She was rejected everywhere she went. Her pleas for help were met with coldness, and Lucy began to feel invisible in the eyes of the people who had once known her. The once strong girl now felt like a hollow shell, surviving only by the barest of means. The injustice she had suffered for years made her want to give up, but deep inside, Lucy knew she couldn't. She had to survive. As fate would have it, Lucy eventually stumbled upon an opportunity. While wandering the streets of the village, she found herself near the bakery, where the smell of food drew her in. Desperate for work, she asked the bakery owner, Mr. Thomas, if she could work for him. Although he was skeptical at first, Lucy's persistence won him over, and he offered her a job. While the work was hard and thankless, it gave Lucy a sense of dignity. For the first time, someone had shown her a small measure of kindness, and it gave her the strength to keep going. From that day forward, Lucy worked tirelessly to save money. She didn't spend a penny frivolously, but instead hoarded every bit she could. Her dreams of escaping the suffocating life in the village grew more vivid as she saved for the future. In the evenings, when the bakery was quiet, Lucy would use the light from the lamps to read. She taught herself everything she could about technology, coding, and programming. It wasn't an easy task, but Lucy had always been determined. She knew this could be her way out, and she refused to let her past define her. Years passed, and Lucy's persistence paid off. She started small, doing freelance work online, fixing bugs, and modifying websites. Eventually, she grew skilled enough to start her own tech business. It wasn't long before Lucy's small company began to flourish, and she started making a name for herself in the tech industry. The girl who had once been called the cursed one was now a successful entrepreneur, Her once painful past transformed into the driving force behind her ambition. Despite her newfound success, Lucy never forgot where she came from. She knew that the town that had rejected her still carried the scars of her past. With a mixture of determination and resolve, she decided to return to Shadow Valley, not to seek revenge, but to bring about change. This time, Lucy was no longer the shy, beaten-down girl. She had returned as a successful and powerful woman. Upon her return, Lucy's presence sent shockwaves through the town. People who had once scorned her now looked at her with fear and awe. It was no longer Monkey Girl, but Lucy Aldridge, the woman who had defied all odds. Lucy didn't need to exact vengeance. Her success was the ultimate revenge. The town that once rejected her now had to face the reality of their actions. But there was one more thing Lucy needed to do: confront her parents. After years of rejection, Lucy had long ago severed ties with them. But now, she stood before them as a successful woman. Her father, Richard, had lost his wealth, and her mother, Isabella, was left with nothing but the echoes of her past choices. They couldn't look Lucy in the eye, and they realized too late the true cost of their rejection. Lucy had found peace not in revenge, but in her ability to rise above it all. She had built a new life for herself, one where she was no longer defined by her past. Instead of seeking retribution, Lucy focused on helping those who had been bullied and rejected like she once was. She invested in her community and launched a foundation dedicated to supporting children who faced the same struggle she had. Through her journey, Lucy learned that true strength comes from within. It's not about hurting those who have wronged you. It's about rising above and using your experiences to create a better future. Lucy's story is a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of self-worth, and the ability to turn pain into something beautiful. Underscore. This narrative aims to connect with American readers by focusing on themes of resilience, personal growth, and overcoming adversity. Certainly, below is a 720-word narrative based on the content and summary you provided, written in English for an American audience. Underscore. The journey of a young woman's resilience and triumph over rejection. Lucy's life was shaped by rejection from the very beginning. Born into a world where the one thing that should have been cherished, her life, became a source of shame and bitterness for her parents, she learned early on that she was different. Lucy was born with a deep red birthmark on her face, which stretched across her forehead and cheek. This physical imperfection would become the defining factor of her life, marking her as the subject of ridicule and the scapegoat of her parents' bitterness. Her father, Richard, could not hide his disgust the moment she was born. He looked at his newborn daughter and felt nothing but resentment, convinced that she was not his own. The birthmark was a curse, a reminder that their family's reputation would be forever tainted by her appearance. Lucy's mother, Isabella, a woman unable to stand up to her domineering husband, could only watch helplessly as her daughter was cast aside. While Isabella loved Lucy deeply, she was unable to protect her from the cruelty of Richard's disdain. From that moment on, Lucy's life was filled with rejection. Her father refused to acknowledge her as his daughter, never once holding her or calling her by name. Instead, he kept his distance, treating her as if she were a disease to be avoided. Isabella, though loving, was weak in the face of her husband's depression. Lucy grew up in a cold and unloving environment, where she received nothing but cruelty from the people who should have nurtured her. As Lucy got older, her plight worsened. The gossip of the town spread like wildfire. People started whispering cruelly behind her back. Monkey Boy, they called her, referencing the large birthmark that disfigured her face. Adults would glance at her with disdain, and the children would mock her whenever she tried to approach them. Lucy was never allowed to play with the other children. They would run away from her, and their parents would keep them away, too. Lucy was painfully aware of how different she was, and no matter how hard she tried to fit in, the town's rejection remained constant. One particular incident in the schoolyard crystallized the cruelty she faced. Samuel had always been an outsider, unwanted by the other children. One day, while walking home, he was cornered by a group of boys, led by Matthew, a bully who delighted in making others suffer. Samuel, hoping to fit in, asked if he could play soccer with the group. Instead of welcoming him, Matthew kicked the ball into Samuel's face, causing him to fall to the ground in front of everyone. The group laughed and cheered, relishing in his humiliation. For Samuel, this moment encapsulated everything he had come to understand about his place in the world. He was nothing more than an object of ridicule. In this dark and lonely world, the only light in Samuel's life came from a woman named Mrs. Helen, an elderly lady who lived near the market. Mrs. Helen was the only one who showed any kindness to him. She would often stop and offer him a small piece of bread, and on one occasion, she whispered words of encouragement that stuck with him forever. "Don't let their cruel words define who you are," she said gently, as she placed the bread in his hands. But even her kindness couldn't change the cruelty that surrounded him. He was still the outcast, still the monkey boy. Samuel's rejection from the town grew more unbearable as time went on. His own father, Edward, continued to mock him, even blaming him for the shame he felt. When the neighbors referred to Samuel as the monkey, Edward's resentment boiled over. "This is all your fault, Rose," he spat at his wife, blaming her for Samuel's existence. With no support from her husband, Rose was powerless to defend her son, and Samuel was left alone to bear the weight of their cruelty. The pain became so much that one night, Samuel left Shadow Valley. He couldn't stay in a place where he was unwanted and despised. He wandered the streets, starving and cold, but he refused to go back. 2 days later, he arrived in New Haven, a city filled with towering buildings and busy streets. But instead of a paradise, the city became another kind of hell for him. Without money or shelter, Samuel begged for food, receiving only cold stares from passers-by. The city was no better than the town he left behind, but Samuel's will to survive was stronger than ever. Eventually, Samuel found work washing dishes at a rundown restaurant owned by a man named Mr. Ramsey. The work was hard and unglamorous, but it provided him with food. For the first time in his life, he experienced something different: respect from the man who employed him. Though Mr. Ramsey wasn't overtly kind, he offered Samuel a sense of worth that had been denied him for so long. Samuel knew this job wasn't the end, but a means to an end. Samuel's journey from despair to hope was fueled by his relentless pursuit of something greater. In the evenings, after a long day of work, Samuel read old newspapers and books left behind by customers. He taught himself to code and develop software, and though he had no money to buy a computer, he made use of the public library's machines. Over time, he became skilled enough to take on freelance work online. His newfound knowledge and abilities began to open doors for him in the world of technology. Eventually, Samuel's hard work paid off. He started his own small software company, using the skills he had developed and the money he had earned. His business grew slowly but steadily. He went from being the boy who was mocked to a successful entrepreneur, and the people who had once ridiculed him were now unknowingly using the software he had created. Samuel had turned his pain into power, and his success became the ultimate form of revenge. After 20 years, Samuel returned to Shadow Valley, not to seek revenge, but to make a difference. He was no longer the broken boy tied to a tree in the town square. This time, he came back as a successful, powerful man. People who had once mocked him now stared in disbelief. Samuel was no longer the outcast. He had become the man who controlled his own fate. When he encountered Matthew, the bully who had tormented him, Samuel stood tall. He didn't need to fight or engage in petty revenge. Matthew, now a broken man, was forced to apologize publicly for his past actions. And as Samuel walked away, he realized that revenge wasn't what mattered most. It was the power to create change. He had gone from the boy who was pushed aside to the man who stood tall, not through cruelty, but through strength, resilience, and the power of forgiveness. Underscore. This narrative aims to connect with American readers, highlighting themes of perseverance, personal growth, and redemption. It celebrates the power of resilience and shows that true strength comes from rising above adversity. One of the most important lessons from Samuel's story is that adversity does not define us. It is how we choose to respond to it that shapes our future. Throughout his life, Samuel faced rejection, cruelty, and neglect, yet he refused to let these experiences break him. Instead, he used them as fuel to build a better life for himself, turning pain into motivation. As we grow older, it's easy to feel like life's challenges have left us with scars. But like Samuel, we have the power to decide how to use those scars. We can choose to let them hold us back or allow them to strengthen our resolve. The key is resilience, the ability to rise after falling and to keep moving forward, no matter how tough the journey. In our later years, we may not have control over all aspects of life, but we can always control our attitude, our willingness to grow, and our desire to make a positive impact. It's never too late to change your life, to find purpose, and to contribute to the world around you. The power to transform lies within us all, regardless of age. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this story of resilience has inspired you to keep going in your own life. If you enjoyed it, please give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to Stories TH for more motivational content that will uplift you every step of the way. Stay strong, and remember, no matter the challenge, you have the power within you.